Everybody's in, Mrs. Booth.
Thank you. This meeting will please come to order. We have a very full agenda this evening. However, I would like to take a few moments before we begin. The entire O&J Roberts School District community and the Chester County educational community wish to express our gratitude to Pennsylvania Representatives Timothy Hennessy of District 26 and Daniel Frill-Otten, Delaware County, District 155, for co-sponsoring the Pennsylvania House Bill 272 to reform Pennsylvania's charter school funding formula. All educational entities aided by taxpayer dollars should be held to the same educational accountability and fiscal responsibility as the 500-plus Pennsylvania school districts. O&J Roberts School District alone is projected to spend $3.6 million for charter schools 2021-22. As this bill moves forward in the legislature, we know the devil is in the details. So I'm hopeful, as Pennsylvania Public Schools are in the midst of the state public school budget calendar, our entire constituency stays alive, active, and alert. Let's keep the ball rolling. Visit the O&J Roberts website, visit Legislative Call to Action to view this statement of gratitude and follow along the updates as the bill wends its way through the Pennsylvania legislature. Secondly, the school board's commitment to good governance is to provide educational and fiscal directives. In this evening's case, the Finance Committee. While the board sets the table, I wish to thank Mrs. Crumrine, her entire business office, and all administrators involved in cost management centers for their diligent preparation. They do the heavy lifting. The directive to begin at a 0% increase. The district's educational community must remain whole, healthy, and well-maintained. Our goal, provide adequate resources for students' mental, social, and educational well-being while remaining cognitive of the community's fiscal health. Following each presentation, the committee and board will have an opportunity to ask questions, request clarification, or make suggestions. At the conclusion, the public will have an opportunity to weigh in. All presentations will be uploaded to the O&J Roberts website immediately following this meeting. Please review. If there are questions, concerns, or suggestions, please contact the board via email or call the district's business office. School board members at ojrsd.net and jcrumrine@ojrsd.net as well. Thank you. So we will begin the agenda, and thank you for listening to my little dissertation. All right. Number 2, refunding of Series 2016 B bonds and new money. We will have Brad Remig from PFM Financial making the presentation. Thank you, Brad.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Again, I'm Brad Remig with PFM, and there are a couple things we want to talk to the committee about tonight, and that is, as was just mentioned, the potential refinancing of some bonds and the potential for some new money to achieve some capital projects. If you could go to the next page, I wanted to kind of review a couple things with you. First off, on the next page is an interest rate chart that kind of gives you an idea of the trends on interest rates over, shows a 20-year picture. And you can see as you move to the far right and in the blue boxed area, rates still continue to remain quite low and attractive for refinancings and some new money as well. If you move to the far right there, you'll notice there was a modest increase as we got towards the second part of February, largely triggered by all the stimulus that I'm sure you have become familiar with. But we do seem to have calmed down and settled in as we've gone through March. And the market does seem to be attractive for doing these types of transactions. The next page actually hones in on that blue box area on the next page, and it kind of gives you an idea of where things have gone for the last 5 years or so. Gives you a little bit more of a narrow picture or more recent picture. But again, the point is that the market still remains quite attractive, especially for highly rated borrowers like Owen J. Roberts School District. If we go to the next page, we have a couple pages in here that show your existing indebtedness. This lists by bond issue your principal and interest payments by each issue, and then in the far right column, column 11, it aggregates it, adds it all up. So you'll see right now in column 11 that right now your current debt service payments are budgeted around $8 million a year for gross. We have highlighted in green there the bond issue that we're going to talk about refinancing, the Series B of 2016. And at the bottom there, you'll notice that it's callable in September of this year. To do a tax exempt refunding of it, we are allowed to close within 90 days of that call date. So we're kind of right in the right timing in terms of talking about this, as we can lock the interest rates in, I'll call it 45 days, even a little less than that, and then close sometime in June. The next page talks about the district's net debt. Some of your bonds qualify for PlanCon reimbursement. As a matter of fact, it looks like most of them do. Those are the percentages at the bottom. So what we've done here is netted out the revenues that you generate or you gain by having the PlanCon dollars come in for those. So this nets out that revenue. Column 11, instead of being 8 million after you get the PlanCon, we're more like 7.5 or so, as shown in column 11. Okay, so the next two things we wanted to talk about, as was mentioned, was the potential refinancing and what type of savings could the district realize by doing a refinancing. And based on current estimates, what we've shown here on the right side, it says cash flow savings. We list by fiscal year the prior net debt service, what we estimate the new refunding net debt service to be, and then the far right column shows the savings. Those savings at the bottom total about $715,000 based on current interest rate assumptions. So it does seem like it's a meaningful number where we could achieve some savings. We also have structured the new bond to pay off in the same amount of time as it was originally scheduled, which is a good thing. And these numbers here are net, as I mentioned, of all the costs that are associated with doing these types of transactions, and it's a true net number to the district, about $715,000 there. So I thought for a moment, I went kind of through that quickly. I didn't know if there was any questions at this point.
Anyone on the committee or the board have questions? Okay.
Okay.
We're good.
So then, I'm sorry?
I said, we're good. Keep going.
Okay, great. Okay, so the next page, we are introducing the idea of the potential new money borrowing. I'll wait till
Brad, we have one
get to
question from a board member.
Okay.
Mr.
Hey,
Deal.
Brad, it's John Deal. Just for clarification, if the call provision is enacted in September, the problem is that if we called them, we'd have to come up flat out with the money to recall those bonds, right? Which is why we're looking at the refinancing.
That's correct.
Got it. Thank you.
You would not be forced to call them, John, but it's an option for you. And we normally see clients do take advantage of that when they can replace the higher rates with lower rates and save some money.
And if we were to reissue, what would the new call provision be on the new issue?
The plan is, if we can keep it bank qualified, that it would be a new 5-year call provision. So the board in September of 2026 at that time would have the option to refinance again if it made sense.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So if we go to the next page, I know you have a busy agenda. We thought we would set the stage here with your new borrowing and remind the committee and the board that if you remember in 2020, we were able to take advantage of some refinancings. Although those were slightly different, they were not tax exempt because the tax code didn't permit for tax exempt advance refundings. We thought we'd take a step back and kind of revisit where we were and where we are today. So column number 2 is the debt service payments that the district had before the 2 refinancings that were done in 2020. So that's where we started a year ago. Column 3, you'll notice those are red numbers. Those are reductions in debt service due to the savings. That's column 3. And if you may recall, in the bottom of column 3, we saved close to, or a little bit over $5.5 million, which was great. So then when you do the math, column 4 is where we sit today. And that should match up with one of my earlier pages. Then column 5 shows you those savings that I mentioned before from this refinancing, from the 16Bs, what we estimate those savings to be. Again, you're seeing red numbers and negative because we're anticipating obviously a reduction in the debt payments. Then column C settles out as to where we would be after the refinancing. Now, the introduction of column 7 is now the payments associated if you needed to borrow or wanted to borrow the $10 million for your capital projects. So those numbers are positives because we're borrowing money for those capital projects. So we would see an increase in the payments. And we thought it was an interesting point of note is that if you'll notice there's some numbers in yellow there, and you'll see that when we started this a year ago, the debt service was about a little under $8 million. And because of the refinancings over the last year and this proposed one, the increase in payments gets us back to where we were before we started all this. So in essence, other than if you'll notice at the end, the debt doesn't drop off and 15 years from now, it's going to be one extra year. But basically the number that's going to be in the budget by the time we got to 22, 23 is going to be approximately the same as it was going to be. So I thought that was a good point to talk a little bit about how the new money would kind of play into the overall refinancings over the last couple of years. So I can pause there for a moment to see if there's questions or I need to clarify anything.
So just to clarify and confirm, we're going to be able to refinance and then take on $10 million in additional project fund debt to fund capital, and our cash flow will remain neutral, meaning we won't have any additional funds out than we were before we did all the debt refinancing.
The only difference for clarity is that if you'll notice on my column 2 versus column 8, there is a modest increase because what we've done is we've filled in some principal in some of those other years starting in, I'll call it 25. There was going to be some modest decreases to about 7.8 million. We filled those in to have the run rate, as we call it, be equal to where it was in 2023. And then in addition, the debt was going to drop from 2035 to 2036 in column 2. It's just going to be another year before we see a meaningful drop. So the new debt has been structured to fill in at the end there. Hopefully that's clear.
Gotcha. Right.
So the proposed that would be the proposal in terms of what we are thinking through. The next page talks a little bit, I think, about a timeline. The thought is, if you remember, I mentioned earlier that when we borrow $10 million or less in a calendar year, and sometimes these current requirements don't count, but if you do the two issues in $10 million or less, we can have them be what's called bank qualified. Bank qualified means you get better interest rates and you get more attractive prepayment provisions on the new debt. And as John mentioned earlier, if we can do them bank qualified, we can get new 5-year calls. So the thought was to introduce this to the Finance Committee, have the board consider a parameters resolution in April. We'll get to work on all the details with official statements and credit ratings with Jackie and Beth and their team, and then be in a position to price the first bond early May, the second bond mid to later May, and then settle on these in June. And that's the timeline that we're kind of working under right now, and the thought process of the plan.
Questions? Is there somebody have their hand up? Is there a question, Paul? None? Okay. All right. I think unless anyone here has more questions? No? Okay. We are at 2.02, committee recommendations to move parameters resolution to the Board of School Directors for approval. Do I have a motion?
Yeah, motion to move this on to the full board.
Thank you, Paul. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you very much.
Oh, if there's
All right,
nothing,
thank you. We will move this on to the full board. Thank you.
thank you.
All right, and thank you very much, Brad. Appreciate it.
Be well.
Thank
I'm going to log off if that's okay with with the committee.
Yes, thank
Yes.
you, Brad.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. See you, Brad.
Good night.
We're going to slightly adjust the agenda. Mrs. Crumrine is going to move item 6, agenda item 6 up, and it's a summary to our entire event, how we're planning for this fiscal year. So Mrs. Crumrine, would you like to make the discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Mrs. Booth. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay with the mask on. Okay, good. I thought I would give a very quick recap of where we are with the overall general fund budget before we have our budget managers do their presentations, because we haven't had an update for the overall budget since February 1st. So Paul, if you wouldn't mind going to the first slide, I wanted to share with you the changes. If you recall, we had a budget deficit of approximately $4 million with the 0% tax increase. We have been working very hard towards a balanced budget, and we are recommending 2 things, and you'll see these items in the presentations tonight. You'll see under the administrative support cost centers, there is a decrease in the budget of $2.3 million. What is incorporated in that is a recommendation to waive Board Policy 601.3, which is the transfer of the 1 mil of real estate to the capital fund. And we're recommending that just for this year. We've done this in the past, specifically in 2008 when the stock market crashed. So we're recommending that we waive that transfer over to from the general fund to the capital projects fund for just 21-22. And if in the end there are budget savings, we would still move it over if the board was comfortable with that. But then this way, we're not budgeting for it. We're working through a capital plan that also includes the new money that you just saw Brad speak about, so that we are not having a tax impact. And hopefully it's temporary, and we are really waiting for our revenues to catch up, because we've had a decrease in assessed value, a drop off in earned income. So we're really just biding some time until our revenues can catch up, and then we can reinstate that expenditure, the transfer to the capital fund. So that is one change in the budget, which is helping reduce the deficit. And then the other piece I just wanted to mention, it's still on that slide, Paul, thank you, is under other district programs. We received our final allocation from the Department of Education today for the, we're going to call it ESSERS 3, which is approximately $2.8 million for the O&J Roberts School District. So this is very, very good news for all schools in the country, really. And our auditor is recommending that we include this in the budget. We have until September of 2024 to spend it. It's going to take some time to develop how we want to use these monies, and everything that we do will come back to the board with recommendations for. So what we're doing right now is splitting that $2.8 million. Half of it will go into 21-22, and the other half will go in 22-23 right now for budgeting purposes. And it's really an in and an out. There's no net tax impact. So it's really a revenue line item in and an estimated revenue line or expenditure line item out that nets to 0. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that that is a change to this budget.
Jackie, is there what that can be spent with? Did that money come with a list of
Yes.
what
Yes.
you
So,
can do, I'm
absolutely.
assuming?
It's a really good question, because
That was my
right now
question.
there are, it just came out today, the final allocation. There is a caveat that there are going to be some heavy restrictions on what you can use this for. Certain percentages will have to be used in certain areas, and we're really waiting for that guidance. So we don't have all of that guidance, but it's going to be strict, and it's going to be designated for those specific purposes, really to help with mitigation strategies for learning loss and other things we may need to open the school for next year and the following year.
Do we have an expectation of receiving the funds? When?
Well, they'll,
Yeah.
I don't know all of that
Okay.
yet. What I heard preliminarily is that they're going to just divide it up over the 2 years and give you a monthly allocation.
Oh,
So
okay.
we will be matching our revenues and expenditures, though, because we're not on the cash basis of accounting. So we'll be matching revenue with expense.
So right now, this is just a holding account that's balancing, it's
Yeah.
zero impact to the budget,
It has
though.
zero impact on the budget.
Okay.
It's going to be very restricted as to what we can use the funds for.
So you're not thinking band uniforms?
No.
Okay,
No.
just checking.
No, not band uniforms. Thanks for the clarification, though. All right, Mr. Sanfran, if you could move to the last slide that shows the 10-year real estate tax history and average. So I wanted to let you know where the budget stands today. We are still working on this budget, and we will continually work on reducing the tax impact for our community. But right now, we are at 1.78%. We're waiting for a couple of items before we finalize or make any other changes. We're waiting for a second look estimate from our liability and property insurance carriers, hoping that the amount, you'll hear Mrs. Polinsky speak about, hopefully that will come down. And then the other large item is we meet with our healthcare consultants next week to take a look at the second look of what they're recommending our premium increases would be. So I'm hopeful that they're going to be better, but I don't know yet until we meet with them. So we will be incorporating, if we have any savings from those two items, we'll be incorporating those into the budget as well. So those are open items right now.
I did have one other question for you last week. Do we have a backup plan in case we don't hit the parameters, in case for some reason the interest rates skyrocket?
Sure, hopefully that won't happen. It has
Right, I
seemed to
know.
stabilize a little bit. But what we would do is we would take a look at our capital plan, and what we would do, we would push some things out further. That's what I believe we would do.
Okay,
That's what we would recommend.
right, thank you.
Mhm.
All right,
And
go
then
ahead.
the presentation that we did in January is updated, and it'll be on the website tomorrow morning. But those are really the big changes to that
Okay.
presentation.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Crumrine. All right, we will now go to agenda item 3, 2021-2022, proposed Pupil Services General Fund Budget. Dr. Marchini, welcome aboard, or welcome to Zoom.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Mary White. Mary is our compliance coordinator, and Mary has the amazing ability of translating all of our student needs into dollars and cents and working within the budget to keep us straight in this. So I have her here if there's any specific questions or anything you might have, any questions you might have. So if you look at the Pupil Services, Paul, are you able to put that presentation up? You can go to the second slide. Thank you. So the Pupil Services portion of the budget takes consideration all students in our buildings and outside placements. It includes special ed, regular ed services, and it has many of the things you've heard me talk about in the past: special education, vocation through the IU, nursing, guidance, psychological services, gifted, Chapter 15, child accounting, census, and legal services. And we have 1,002 special ed students this current year. Some things on this first slide that are jump out at you, first of all, is the charter schools. We've had a lot of discussions about this. From March of 2020 until the end of February of this year, we have approximately 68 more students. We had a few more. However, we've had about 5 to 10 return, and a few others are promising to return. So you can see the budget difference there takes into account that only about 25% will return, and that's a $1.3 million portion of the budget, increase to the budget. Some other things are, if you see lines like the hearing support, visual support, those are direct needs for only a handful of students. So if a student graduates, moves out of the district, that need is then changed. And you can see we list the number of students per line item because each one of these is directly related to the students we have in these programs. And then the other you see is the learning support, 368 students over that entire area through some efficiencies and also through some assessments, and also some fewer students. We're able to reduce that by 93,000. And then the big item at the bottom there is a vocational education reduction of $563,000. Approximately 5 years ago, the high school administration, along with Pupil Services and the district superintendent, decided to limit the students that would go to TCHS full-time. The full-time program is an additional $10,000 to be full-time, and then they charge per course. For a special ed student, it could be close to $30,000, a regular ed student, $20,000. What we did is, as we reduced those per class, so we allowed kids that were full-time to finish up there, and each class that came in, we reduced it to part-time only. So they would go to TCHS in the morning and then take our academic classes at the high school in the afternoon. Because it's on a 3-year billing cycle, we're now realizing 3 classes full of students that are part-time only. We have a few exceptions for special education needs, but we're now realizing $563,000 in savings from the IU based on that. Can you hit next slide, Paul? Thank you. And then some of the bigger ticket items here, you can see the occupational therapy, physical therapy services. There's a savings of $135,000. We've done a lot of work over the last couple of years with our assessments, making sure that students just who qualify for special ed don't automatically qualify for occupational therapy, physical therapy. And a fewer students, but there's a lot of efficiencies in that reduction of $135,000. And then our total for Pupil Services is up 417. Please take in consideration, as you see that large number, an increase in the budget, that there is a almost $1.4 million increase in charter schools. So we were able to cut quite a few dollars out of this budget to, take consideration the increase in charter schools. Next slide, Paul. Thank you. The IDEA funds, these are funds that come from the federal government, and based on our upload of the information for students in our special ed programs. And this is for special ed services only. The big bill there, Chester County Intermediate Unit Placements, where you see a reduction of $181,000, that's direct related to 2 students. So they, one graduated, one moved away, and that we have less placements, and the placements with those types of disabilities are very pricey, and we're able to get those savings. The other one you've heard before that we've continued is the early intervening services, $159,000. That takes into consideration the disproportionality. So we have to dedicate $159,000, roughly 10% of the budget towards, 15% of the budget towards those intervening services that I've talked about in the past. Next one, Paul. Access funds. Mary White and her office have done a tremendous job over the last few years, making sure that we can have access to the access funds. What this is we are able to bill for related services provided for the students. So the first thing that has to do is we have to make sure that we're in compliance with all of the certificates, highly qualified status, licensure for the staff and or contractors we use. And then based on that, we're able to bill. We then use, we kind of put a few items into this they're able to use for continuation of services. You can see there's a reduction in nursing services from previous. We have 2 years ago worked to end all nursing contracts. We used to use nursing contracts for substitute nurses for some of our students. We were able to hire one nurse who's at West Vincent Elementary in the life skills program. Otherwise, we have substitute nurses that we utilize day to day for any kind of needs, which is a pretty significant savings from the contracted services. And we're same proposed budget of $600,000 that we're drawing down from the access funds that we have. Next slide, Paul. And then school health services, this is anything that supports the nursing services in all 7 school buildings. It's a pretty consistent amount, and it takes in consideration medical supplies, the services, screening, dental screenings, nursing screenings. And then the non-public health services, which is minimal at this point. So it's pretty much the same number. And then just a reminder of some of the areas that student services takes into consideration. You can read through that. Obviously, special ed's a huge portion of that, but there's a lot of other programs that comes out of the student services office that plays into helping students and this budget. Any questions?
Any questions?
Yeah, I got just a couple questions. I don't know if this would be more Jackie or you, Rich, on just translating this for the board for some apples to apples comparisons. Can we see number of students that are in, as we do this budget comparison this year versus last year, so we can see, is it a net increase because of decrease in students, or is the service per student increasing or decreasing, is the nature of that
Sure,
question?
we can give you the numbers from last year, and you can compare it to this year. And I will say that these numbers are associated with every individual student. So that student's full cost is in there. So it's a changing in service from outgoing students to incoming students.
Right, so if, the budget changes, we serviced, let's say, 300 students last year, and we're 260 this year, you're gonna have a net decrease, or if just the same amount of students, but different service levels.
services.
So I just want to understand the difference between that.
It's a combination.
Combination of
Yep.
the both, and
can do that.
just so we understand
Mhm.
what's driving. And I want to get to, if we could, just an understanding of the cost for, on the same service provided. Like, are we seeing an increase or decrease in cost for that same student for the same type of stuff? Are we?
Well, what we're doing with all of our contracted services is we're really negotiating keeping the rate increase down. So if we have, let's just say, a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract, we're saying, hey, keep the 3-year contract averaging below 2%. So every contract that we're renewing, for PTS or any of the, because we do a lot of contracted services. And then the other services that come through the IU are on the marketplace service list.
Okay. So you guys, you can give us a little more breakout so we can
Specific,
see
sure.
kind of an apples to apples on the services.
You bet.
And the other question I had is on the nursing. I know we hired in nursing internally versus the staffing. Is that internal on a different budget then? Did we just lose that number to, so that isn't really a savings to our budget. That's just a transfer of that budget item from Pupil Services to our HR department,
There's
right?
Different
That-
types of nursing services.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about
Yeah.
that, Rich?
Sure, briefly. The one nurse that we did hire, it goes into our payroll as an EFT, so that is a shift. However, we used to have quite a bit of money in our nursing contractors where we would need a substitute nurse and we would call the agency and they would send a substitute nurse. It was much more expensive per day than our substitute nurses that we pay currently. We also know the folks that we have as O&J subs through our subservice. So it's higher quality, less expensive, and we also know them, and they get a relationship with the students as well. So the EFT that you asked about that we hired, yes, that's taken out of our budget and put into the payroll. However, the contracted nurses was pulled out of the budget almost altogether because we changed our format.
Mhm.
Okay. Again, I'm just trying to get to that same thing, is a more of an apples to apples comparison, because it's hard to track budget changes if it's changes in how we budget as well as the expense of the budget. I just want to understand the different cost expense changes. And if we move it, kind of move it
Understood.
out of the last year number too, and just say,
Mhm.
here's the net of that. So we understand how it flows.
Okay.
We were last year, just to answer your question about the contracts, last year we asked all of the contractors to give us a 1 year without any increases. And they did that. This year, as Jackie said, all the increases have been less than 1% a year for 2 years. And in some of the contracts, we're able to negotiate. The third year stays the same. So 3 years of a contract for probably close to 1.8, 1.9% over 3 years. Increases the first 2 years, no increase the third year. For those that we're happy with, we worked that out. So it's been pretty good. The business office Mary White has been great contacting them and just explaining what we are looking for.
Oh, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Marchini.
So I have a kind of general question. I know we've talked about going into the next school year, how our students are going to need extra supports, but I'm not seeing anything in this particular budget that addresses that need. So where should we be looking in the budget for those dollars?
Those dollars will specifically be in the ESSERS pot of money that I was talking about earlier.
All right.
That will be in that $2.8 million divided over 2 years. So that is where all of those, and it's going to take some time to flesh out exactly what we're going to be recommending. But we'll come to you, and they will be in a separate, we call it cost center, so that we can track those costs and match them up with the revenue
All
that
right,
comes
thank
in to
you.
offset them.
Many of the supports we put into place previously are still in this budget, including our psychological services, mental health, scholastic coaches, things like that. I already gave Jackie a very lengthy shopping list for the needs for next year based on the funds she was just talking about. We'll see what happens.
We have to
Didn't
collect
want you to
everybody's
miss
shopping
that.
list.
Pardon? Mr. Deal, you have a question.
I do. Just jumping back to Jackie for a second. Jackie, the 1.78% tax increase, what's the nominal number on the gap that we're still looking at to whittle down? What's the real number?
That's a good question. It's about $223,000 to get us down to 1.5%. I have to calculate what it would be to get us down to 0, but it's going to be over $1 million.
Okay. And then to jump back to Rich, do you mind putting that presentation back up real quick? If we can. It's one of your first slides, a slide that started with charter schools.
Your favorite.
That's my favorite.
Yeah.
So just a question, so 241 students. Rich, did I understand you to say that there are, was it 68 more students in that number than the last budget year?
So it was, 68. We had in March of 2020, we had about 173 students. February, at the end of February this year, 241.
Okay, so I'm doing a ballpark. So that's about $20,300 per extra student, right? If I did my math right. I guess my question is, I understand we're looking at the pupil services budget, but two questions related to that number. One is, are there any offsets of losing 68 kids from our regular curriculum? I know we're putting out 20 grand for each one in terms of charter school expenditures, but are there any kind of savings in other budgets because we have 70 less students that might offset that?
At this point in time, there's no direct offset, Mr. Deal, because those students are sprinkled out all across the districts, K to 12. So it's not like we can say, oh, we don't need one classroom because of that.
Right.
So that's very hard to achieve savings when they're really spread out K through 12. Our projection for 2021 is $3.9 million. So we know that we're going to be over budget in that category line item.
Right.
We'll have other savings to help offset that for some of the time that school wasn't open. So hopefully we won't be in the negative. We're hoping to gain some of those students back, and we're being conservative in our projection. We're projecting 3.6 million versus the 3.9 that we think we're going to end up with this current year. But that is one
okay.
area that we're really tracking, and hopefully, I think we've had 10, right, Dr. Marchini, right now, students who have said, hey, we're going to come back to Owen J. Roberts next year. We have 15 built into this budget. So once, if we exceed 15, I'll be able to lower that number. I'll do it up until the last minute if we
10
can.
kids, 200 grand. Does this include any BVA money?
BVA,
Is that
yep,
in this
it includes
line?
everything.
Yeah, okay, that's
Yeah,
on this
it's
line
in there.
item.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
It's in there.
And then
BVA
yeah, go
usually
ahead.
only
I'm sorry.
that's right. BVA is only about usually only about $25,000 with the handful of kids we have in there. That could increase if we did offer that as an option for some students. Mr. Dio, we also looked at specifically the special ed students that left and went to the charter schools. It's that number right now is about, I believe, 25, 27 kids. But most are learning support and don't have any more severe needs. So again, as Jackie said, it's throughout the grade levels, and there's very little savings with those students.
John,
then
that's a really
Yeah, I'm
good
sorry. Go ahead,
question.
Melissa.
That's a really good question. It's something people don't really quite understand, that if we don't have an extra, say 70 students, we should be able to minimize our expenditures. But as Mrs. Crumrine said, if there's scattered from first grade or from kindergarten through grade 12, it's really hard to save anything. It'd be different if we could convince all third graders from one class to go. But that's a misconception. That's a hard thing to get through to people. We don't necessarily save money by losing students like that. I just wanted to thank you for the question, because I think everybody, asks that question and has that in their mind. So thanks, John.
Sure. The second question I had is related to the proposed charter school reform bill. I'm not familiar with all the provisions of the bill, but does that have any financial ramifications if it were to pass, or is it more an oversight question than it is cost savings?
It should be a cost savings, especially in the cyber charter. And who knows, as I said, the devil's in the details. We don't know what the details will be. There will be amendments, and we don't know what the final fiscal outcome will be, but that's why we want everybody to stay alert and keep on our representatives, to keep it a clean bill, to provide fiscal resources for us that we should have in our public schools. So that's kind of a question we can't really answer, but there should be significant savings if it goes through cleanly. That is also accountability, educational accountability is part of it as well. I'm speaking to the fiscal end of it at the moment.
Right. So accountability may mean that, fewer kids may be enticed to go to those schools if they're not providing adequate education. But I understand you to say there may be some, and who knows what finally comes out, but there could be some cost implications for us there, cost savings implications.
Right.
So, okay,
Yeah.
that's it. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. More questions from the board? No, we good? All right, thank you, Dr. Marchini. Appreciate it, and appreciate everybody for their hard work. All
Thanks for the
right,
opportunity.
all right. We are up to agenda item number 5, proposed capital budget and forecast.
I think we have the operating budgets first.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Huh.
Item number 4.
Oh, sorry. Item number 4. We'll have the operational cost center budgets presented.
Yep, and the first
Yes.
cost center budget, this evening we'll have transportation, facilities, and business services. The first one to present will be Mr. Gray. He is the Director of Transportation. Take it away, Chris.
Thank you for having me tonight. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I'm not used to going first, so this is kind of an honor. If you look
Get a star on your forehead.
So I have a lot of notes, but I really want to address, if you look at our budget, it kind of, not a lot of movement. I really want to address the contracted carrier line item, fuel, and software, educational software and licensing fees. I'm happy to say that for the 4th year in a row, we haven't had to increase total buses. So we're gonna stick with our 90 buses. For a little bit of background, we used those 90 buses to transport our 100 square miles plus 10 miles beyond for non-public school students. So in addition to our 7 public schools, we transport 62 non-public, private, special needs programs, and 2 charter schools. We also have homeless students that we're responsible for transporting. It's all incorporated into this budget and transportation costs. Our contract, this is the 2nd year of our new contract, which reflects a 3% increase. So that's calculated to our contract with G&L. That is kind of, our hands are kind of tied when it comes to that sort of thing. But I think it's important to note that as part of our new contract that all of our buses, and I think you're all aware, have digital cameras, GPS, and everybody's favorite, the new bus lettering. So that's all incorporated into our new daily rate at, we'll get to that slide, but I think it's $278 a day. You'll see a substantial jump in numbers between 2019 and 2020. That was the first year of our new contract. So we're moving into the second year. We're using the same 90 buses. You can go to the next slide, please. This was tricky. Total students served. I kind of went back a year only because this current year has been so different. The numbers were kind of down, so I went back a year to do totals or forecasting for the future. And I think those numbers are pretty good. Surprising that we didn't have many more charter school students. I think they all went remote. So that number was down a little bit, but it hovers right around that number. Everything else kind of stays about the same. You can, next slide, please. Here we are. These are the new contractor rates for the upcoming school year. And I think I'm blocking the column I want to look at. So you see a 3% increase to 270, I gotta find the page, 278.10. Midday route, we don't do a lot of midday transportation. I did find an error there that should not be $20.53, but it should be $76. So I apologize for that. The midday runs are early intervention. They have an AM and a PM program. So we do midday transportation for early intervention only. Everything else is the 3% increase. Activity run, I don't know if we're going to continue, but that's been discontinued for this year. Driver wages for sports trips and aides wages that we use for special needs transportation. I'm going to jump right now into fuel because it looks like on my budget that we have some pretty substantial savings. But I'm not sure if you're aware that we do purchase fuel ahead of time. And we purchase fuel in a fuel bid process or consortium with other school districts in Chester County through the Chester County Intermediate Unit. So we purchase fuel with other municipalities in Chester County, and we get a pretty substantial price break when we buy in such large quantities. The only caveat is once we purchase this fuel, we're kind of committed to it. So as of March 13th of last year, we didn't do a whole lot of transportation. So we had surplus fuel. So we're still accountable for 109,000 gallons of diesel and about 10,000 gallons of gasoline that we purchased last year that we will have to use before we get into the current year, which kind of reflects the numbers in the budget. So we committed to 80,000 gallons, which would put us at our normal 189,000 gallons, and 20,000 gallons of gasoline, which would put us at our normal 30,000 gallons for a full normal school year. It's the same fuel bid that we use to purchase propane and heating fuel for our building. So it's all part of the same bid process. It starts in late December. We have to have a commitment by mid-February. So it makes it a little more difficult to determine what you're going to use in the upcoming school year. So we're still, bottom line is we're still committed to the 109 that's left over from the current year for the upcoming school year. And then I think the next line item I want to address is the software, which I'm really excited about. And I believe this is coming to the April school board meeting. We've been exploring new routing software for a few months now, and we've kind of determined that TransFinder is probably the most efficient and most robust software on the market at the moment. I could talk about this for hours, but I'll try to hit the highlights. Obviously it's a more robust software. It hosts our data remotely. There's no server maintenance here. It integrates with Skyward, which is what we use for our student management. Actually, it partners with Skyward. So we can automate data transfers back and forth between our routing software and Skyward student information. So their bus information could be automated to drop every night at 2 a.m. The database maps are GPS maps, which actually locates the students on their actual residence, actually at their mailbox. So we're going to have more efficient routes. We'll have more time efficient, effective routes. Times will be more correct. I foresee fewer errors, driver errors. It also offers turn-by-turn directions. It integrates with the GPS that's in our school buses. The first year cost is pretty substantial. However, that's for setup, route conversions, data transfers, pretty much all of our conversion setup costs. Second year costs, however, are half of what we would get from our current provider for the same service, actually more service. So I'm excited about that. I could talk about that forever. They're the highlights of my budget. Does anyone have any questions? I know I speak a little fast.
I have, oh, go ahead.
I'm fine with you going on and on about the software.
I'm kind of a map geek, so I'm all about it. So it will actually pinpoint students to their mailbox, which I'm super excited about because our current software uses ranges. So if you live on a street that has an address range of 2 to 100, but they're really spaced 2, 10, 20, it will drag the student to the wrong intersection. And that happens quite often. I find myself looking at tax maps just when I'm not sure, which is kind of clunky and time consuming. And I'm super excited about the database math.
I do have a question that unfortunately does not involve the software.
Ah,
There was some discussion at the Chester County Legislative update for lawmakers and school board members about a potential savings that would be available if Pennsylvania decided to decrease the number of miles that we're obligated to bus from 10 miles to 5 miles. Have you done any recent analysis on whether that would save OJR money?
it would save, I think we just did this a couple weeks ago, and I think approximately a dozen buses, approximately. I don't know. Every year, it all depends because we cover such a large area. It all depends on what schools we would be obligated to transport to. So we don't go to every non-public school every year, but we could potentially go to every school within 10 miles of our district boundaries. So that's 1,000 square miles. It would cover an enormous area. We do employ a transfer system, which takes care of a lot of that. So we minimize our busing from kind of the beginning. So we do, most of the impact would come from direct runs, which are our longer runs, like Malvern Prep, Villa Lower, Villa Upper, Delaware Valley Friends. Those schools that are beyond 5 miles that have direct runs, possibly Bishop Shanahan. So those schools would realize our savings.
That's interesting, Jennifer. I've been working on that for years. And Mr. Gray provided me information a couple years ago, and if my memory serves me correctly, taking that 10-mile radius around our Wiggly Waggly school district, which is 112 square miles, makes us an 883 square mile school district. And if we would refine it to a 5-mile extension of our district, it would take it down to, I think, a 253-mile circumference, which is remarkable in that alone, as well as it would make it more advantageous to start school later because we have to get our other children to their schools at their time frame. So that's something I have been working on as well for years, as well as the charter school reform, just to come to an agreement to reduce it from 10 miles to 5 miles. For large rural school districts like ours, it's impressive just to take that giant leap from 110 square miles to 883. I may be a mile or two off, Mr. Gray, but if I remember right, that was just about the exact numbers that I have in my head. So that's a very good question, and we have been working on it for years. And everybody can do the same that we've been doing with charter school, just to not denying these students an opportunity to have busing, but it's just to limit the extension. We have Pennsylvania school districts delivering students to Delaware, Ohio, West Virginia, Virginia, and New Jersey. And I think we could probably eliminate a lot of that if we would reduce that mileage. I think we're only one of 2 states left in the country that do that. Anyway, sorry, I got on my soapbox, but you brought it up, Jen.
Well, and the irony is that if there were no busing at all, and someone proposed it with the current way that people handle government facilitated monies, it would never pass. Possibly not even transportation for students within the district. You know, if there were no busing, and it were a new proposal, people wouldn't even think that we should pay for kids to get to their own school. They'd say the parents should handle that.
Right? Yes.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
I'm looking at the total students served, and I'm just curious about this year. Obviously, we have a lot of students who have not come to a school building all year. Was there no change in bus routes and things like that because of that? Because, we had to leave those routes as is in case they wanted to come back? Or I'm just curious about the fact that, did we save anything? Did we make any alterations?
We did. We did eliminate bus 54, which was an out-of-district special needs bus, only because those students chose to stay home. Unfortunately, we had the apartment fire, which kind of made up for that in different ways. So we used a couple more vans than we normally would. The tricky part with the non-public school students, I left every student in our public schools on a bus route. So every public school student has a seat on a bus. The non-public schools, we only transport if they send in an Act 372 form requesting transportation from a public school district. So those numbers were down probably in the ballpark of 200 students, only because they chose either to drive themselves or a remote option. We bus so few students, but we still have to get them there. So there wasn't really the opportunity based on their non-public school bell times, because we had to accommodate their calendar and their school bell times. So we group them together as best we can in their same geographic area with the bell times that correspond. I know we do, for example, bus 3 does High Point, Conestoga Christian, Twin Valley Bible, and Immaculate Conception. So we use that one bus for four schools. Immaculate Conception has 1 student. High Point has 6 students. Twin Valley Bible has 2 students. And so there's so few numbers in a lot of these non-public schools, especially to the west. But we do try to group them together as best we can in our transfer system. So unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of opportunity aside from the direct runs with no students. And a lot of the savings had come from special needs students, special needs programs that 1 or 2 students that chose to go remotely.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
I could tell you.
I move
Even
things
with a
around.
mask.
So you mentioned that the number of charter students that we bus has remained pretty consistent, right?
Correct.
And we know that, we've had a lot more students go to charter schools, which means they're going to virtual ones. Do we know of those students who are going to stay in charter schools? Will they stay in virtual ones, or are those charter schools going to become in person and therefore we need more kids a bus?
No, right now, the loss of students from O&J are definitely to the cyber charters, that we anticipate them staying cyber charters. Our numbers for our 2 largest brick and mortar, Renaissance and Collegium, very consistent, hasn't changed much over the last 3 years.
I can tell you sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off,
go
but
ahead.
last year was 82 students. This year, 77 students. So it remains pretty consistent
For busing,
for busing.
yeah. Hopefully we get some of those cyber students back. That's really what we're hoping.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Gray.
Thank
Did
you.
I remember my numbers right?
Very close. I think you remember them better than I do.
Chris, thank you so much for talking with great passion about your budget for next year.
Thank you.
Okay, our next budget is the facilities budget, and our Director of Facilities, Mike Shelgren, will be sharing.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me. I'd like to just preface this by saying this is just the operating budget. Anything capital related, facilities capital related is will be discussed in item 5. So just going down through the budget, I'll go line by line to give a little explanation. So the first line, professional services, that's when we hire architects, engineers, that sort of thing. We're constantly having engineers overlook things, check into our problems, help us resolve issues, make sure we're code compliant, that type of thing. So that's That's remained consistent costs throughout the years. Travel costs, obviously that's conferences, mileage, that sort of thing. General supplies, that is, majority of that is for HVAC filters, and the remainder is used to purchase employee uniforms, office supplies, maybe small pieces of furniture, that sort of thing. We did reduce that one $15,000 this year. We felt comfortable that 85,000 would cover it for 21-22. Software and licensing fees, that's our school dude computerized maintenance management software. This year, we're looking into a software upgrade. It hasn't been upgraded in at least a decade, probably a lot longer. So we're definitely due for an upgrade. So we're hoping to do that this summer into the fall. Books, that's strictly for our housekeeping CMMI, which stands for Cleaning Management Institute, learning materials and tests, and that's tied to our union contract. We train our housekeepers. We have a trainer come in. We just pay for the books and tests. They have to take a test. They take a monthly class. They take a test, and once they pass the test, it's tied to their wage increases. And we did reduce that down to reduced it $1,500 this year because most of our housekeepers have gone through this process. So we have only a fewer folks this year that we got to get tested through. Replace capital equipment. That is mainly housekeeping equipment and other large pieces of equipment like a snow blower or like a drain snake or something like that. That's for that larger type of equipment, not actual like a capital project equipment. And dues and fees, that's the kind of the annual stuff that we have to do. Like we have annual boiler fees, elevator inspection fees, well permit fees, that type of stuff. And building services, disposal services, that's the trash removal. Electricity is obvious. Water and sewage, that is not only our water bill and our sewage bills where we're tied into the municipal plants, but that also covers our operating costs of our wastewater treatment plants. We still have French Creek and the main campus on our own plants, and we subcontract the operation of those plants out. The maintenance on our building services, that covers any kind of contractors we hire, and a lot of that is things that we're required to do. Like we have in sprinkler inspections, we have we subcontract out our annual boiler startups and shutdowns, or chiller startups and shutdowns. The bigger equipment where our people aren't necessarily equipped to do that, we bring in the contractor to do that. And plus, if we have major emergencies when we have to bring a contractor in, like a pump burns up or something like that, we have to bring someone in right away. That's what we use that for. Also, like generator maintenance, that kind of thing. Rentals, that's the warehouse rental, and that I'm excited to say that's one that's going to drop off here if all goes well. If we move into the district service center next summer, if everything goes as planned, that will end. Excuse me, and our lease is done in 2022, so it should work out nicely. And that's a cost we can completely drop off the budget. Extermination services, that's our exterminator, bees, mice, that sort of thing. Natural gas, that's for heating our buildings, kitchen natural gas. Bottle gas is that's strictly propane for Warwick. Warwick is heated on propane, so that's broken out as bottled gas. And oil is the heating fuel oil, which Mr. Gray explained. We purchase it the same way he does through this exact same process through the Chester County IU. So next slide, please. Snow removal services. We with our employees, we handle all the sidewalk snow removal, but all of the driveways and lots and all that we subcontract out, and that's the cost for that. And that's always a really tricky one to to try to target every year. This year I think we used about every little bit of it. Last year we had almost nothing, but 175 seems to be that carries us through an average to above average year. And Then lawn services, that's our subcontracted, the, lawn cutting, weed whacking, that sort of thing. And then repair and maintenance, that is anything other than lawn cutting. That's tree removal, tree replacements, mulching, that sort of thing. And then plant services, this is our supplies for our tradesmen. So, our carpenter, electrician, HVAC, painting, plumbing, and then the last one is the janitorial supplies. And we did increase that 10,000 this year because, we know post-COVID, we're never going to go back to where we were before. So there's going to be a few, extra things that we're going to need to buy, like hand sanitizer. And we're going through a lot more hand soap and that sort of thing. So we felt comfortable moving that up $10,000 would cover those additional costs going forward. And then the last item is staff development, admin, and support, and that's for conferences. And we reduced that a little bit because we really don't. We're hoping to go to more in-person conferences, but we never did stop going to the virtual conferences and that sort of thing. And hopefully we can continue that in the future. So and then the bottom line was the budget's basically flat. It's a slight reduction of $1,200 from last year. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have any questions from the committee or the board?
Sure. So Mr. Gray did explain the fuel costs and the bulk purchase, but he had savings on that bulk purchase between this year and next year, but you don't. Is that just attributable to the fact that the buses weren't running, or do you also have savings? You're just not confident about budgeting it?
We did not have savings in oil because unlike Chris, when we went into full virtual or partial virtual, we still needed to heat the buildings. So there was no cost there savings to me. We did try to reduce as much as possible, but it really was very insignificant. We still had to keep the buildings at a minimal temperature. And, and most of the time we did have people in the building, so we had to keep it at occupied temperature.
Okay, so you didn't get the reduced usage this year that then carries over to next year?
We did have some, but not nearly what Mr. Gray had.
Okay. And my other question was, I saw HVAC filters, you said were in the general supplies. And so I was curious, because you felt confident taking a decrease next year, was this year actually an increased cost for that?
It was we were able to cover a lot of that with the grant funds that we had. So we did increase some filtration this year. The way we did that was we hired an engineer to come in under professional services to examine all of our systems and make recommendations on where we could, go to an next level filter and that sort of thing. The frequency of the filter change didn't change, but we did change the type of filters in some of the units. But overall, we still felt like we were comfortable reducing that budget line item. We'd still be covered.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I had a question about electricity costs, I guess water sewage. I want you to be able to make sure my electricity and sewage does not increase from year to year. How do you do it for the district? Because prices, PICO increases every year for me.
Yeah, our sewage costs unfortunately remain the same no matter how much or how little we use. We have a negotiated rate. The water and electricity does go up and down as far as based on what we use. But I can tell you we're very, very aggressive on for instance, for electricity. We're very aggressive with making sure anybody needs to use the building after hours. We know exactly what room they're in, how long they're going to be in. We only turn the equipment on for that amount of time. We try to consolidate where people meet. We're always looking for ways to reduce it. So I think between that and just working with the buildings, it's been we've been able to hold the line there on electricity.
I'm with you. I wish they'd do the same for us as well. Any other questions? No? All right, Jackie. Thank you very much,
All right,
Mike.
thanks a lot.
Well done.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, our next department is Business Services, and Mrs. Beth Polinsky will be presenting that budget.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So before I get started, I just wanted to go through some of the items that we budget for in the business services budget because it kind of is a mix of a bunch of things. Obviously, it handles our financial operations of the district, which include tax collection, accounts payable, billings and accounts receivable, purchasing, payroll, cash management, general accounting, and then the large transfers that fund the capital reserve and the debt service funds is also there, as well as our tax collection, our senior tax rebate program and the property and general liability insurance for the district. Overall, our budget is decreasing by 18.5%, almost $2.3 million. And I'm just going to go through some of the higher variances that are listed here on the summary. The first one being business services. That line is comprised mainly of an increase of cost for our transition to, which is our final stage of our transition to our financial software upgrade, as well as plans to restructure our electronic timekeeping system in there. And we also have our biannual OPEB evaluation that's required that year. It's every other year, and this year happens to be the year that we're on. The next increase of $65,000 is under the insurance line. And Jackie had mentioned before in the beginning of the presentations that this is a result of our first look with our agent, and we are hopeful that the second look improves, but we are also aware that there's great volatility in the current insurance market. So we're waiting to see what that second look comes out to be. The increase of $24,650 in the senior tax relief program line, that is the incorporation of the new senior citizens property tax and rent rebate program that was approved at the 9/21/20 board meeting. So that's an estimate there. And then Jackie had alluded to the next line item, which is the suspension of the fund transfer for capital reserve this year, which will be approximately $2.7 million savings. The next line item, which is an increase of $184,000, is for our debt service transfer. And that number is based on phasing in the new debt issuance that we had talked about earlier. And at the same time, considering the decreased investment interest that is resulting from the current low interest rate environment that we're experiencing now. Finally, the budget reserve increase of $78,751 is per our board policy, which is equal to 1% of the next year's expenditure budget. Overall, it results in a decrease of 18.5%. The next slide really is just the points that I just reviewed. Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions?
I do, Melissa, if you can hear me.
Yes.
If you net out the 2.8, the transfer of the capital reserve, what's the net effect to our budget up or down if you don't count the transferring over the 2.8 million for capital?
I'm not sure that I
Can you
understood that.
repeat that, Paul?
So you said when you said we're reducing the budget because of the not transferring the $2.8 million, and we're realizing savings there. We're just
Right.
if
It's
you
two-
don't count, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. It's $2.6 million, almost 2.7 million. And we just removed that line item,
Okay, so you just remove the whole line item
the
then.
whole line
Sorry.
item. Yep,
Okay, gotcha. That's it. Thanks.
you're welcome.
Anyone else? Okay, I
Okay.
think we're there.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Very well done.
All
All
right.
right. we are now at the proposed capital budget and forecast, item number 5, 2021-22.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Booth.
Yep.
And I'll just ask Mike Shelgren to hang around in case there are any questions related to facility items. But what I think I'll do is just remind everybody, we have a 5-year capital plan. It's in accordance with Pennsylvania Department of Education. So if you have a capital fund, it needs to go out 5 years, and you need to be planning at least 5 years ahead of time. The first line item talks about vehicle replacement. We had suspended our vehicle replacements a couple of years ago, if you recall, while we were doing our projects, because we were using capital funds for that. We're now cycling back in replacement of some of our older vehicles. So the security vehicles, the older Ford Explorers, and one transportation van are scheduled for this summer for replacement in 21-22. Technology, Mr. San Francisco already reviewed that budget with you in detail, and the detail is posted on the website already, so I will skip over that. But it is part of the overall capital fund. Building maintenance and improvement services. I'm going to go over some of the differences. These are the ongoing capital costs to maintain our facilities. So I think what I'll do is point out some differences or changes and then answer any questions if that'll work for everybody. So the first line item, carpet floor, resilient and carpet floor repairs, replacements. We cycle through the buildings replacing older carpet. In 22-23, in conjunction with, which is not this summer, next summer, we're planning a high school media center renovation. We were planning that before COVID, and we really put it to the back burner. So we feel like next summer, hopefully we'll be back to normal. We'll be able to have contractors in the building working. So we plan on replacing the LGI rugs, the office rugs, and then doing the library renovation for the high school. The East Coventry closeout, really what we're budgeting right there is the retainage that's just the retainage, which is the amount that we're holding on the general contractor. They have some roof work to do in order for us to receive the warranty from the manufacturer. They can't do roof work during the school year, so we've just been waiting and holding on that until school is out, and then they'll come fix those panels, have the inspection, and then we'll release the funds. I think I will jump down to the item that says feasibility study, facility improvements, main campus, and French Creek traffic. What we have been doing with this line item is just pushing it back a year because we were in the middle of COVID. You'll hear that a lot. We've kind of pushed back a year, and we've added 3% to the items that were recommendations in the feasibility study itself. So at some point in time, if we want to begin planning those infrastructure, and it's really the traffic issues that we have at both of those facilities, we should probably look to begin some planning on that this year in order to have it come to fruition in 23 and 24, if the board still wants to move forward. So I'm just planting that seed now. The next section are the energy savings projects. We have them listed out separately now, but as you know, we received proposals. We received 3 proposals from energy saving companies, and we're in the process of reviewing those, and we'll be making a recommendation hopefully by the end of the month. I know we have some scheduled. I think it's April 13th. We have some interviews scheduled.
Right.
So we'll have more to come on that. If there is a project that is worthwhile, we might change this line item a little bit and build it together into a guaranteed energy savings project. And what that will hopefully do is in the outlying years, it'll reduce our operating costs. That's the whole point of doing an energy savings project, is that we actually see operational savings on the operating side in future years. So I'll skip down to the West Vincent dry pipe nitrogen generator. That's the fire suppression system, the sprinkler system at the West Vincent Elementary School. We've had some issues with that over the past, if you remember, pipes freezing, water. So we've had some insurance claims. It's at the point now where we really need to take care of that system and fix it. So that's in the schedule. It's not something I think that has to be done exactly in the summertime, but they're working on getting pricing and firming up for that. The High School Media Center we talked a little bit about in 22-23. And we're also going to combine with that project. We need some of our aging elementary schools have very outdated furniture in some of their spaces. So French Creek and North Coventry are our two oldest elementary schools. So we're going to, we've refreshed the technology and everything is fine. So we're just going to update some of the furniture in those elementary school libraries or media centers. We have the marquee sign on the main campus is, we can't get replacement parts for it. It's pretty old. The right lower quadrant on it is not working, so you'll never see anything lit up on that. So we really need to consider replacing the marquee sign on Route 23. And then we also have some aging scoreboards at the baseball and softball fields. They're not for this summer. I'm just sharing what we have lined up for future plans. In the past, RA has been able to help us with that. I'm just not sure where they are with fundraising and things like that during COVID. This will be a little tricky. Our priority for this summer is obviously the district service center conversion. We have a meeting that we're attending on April 14th, the Zoning Hearing Board of East Coventry Township. This is on the agenda to approve the use of that building. And as soon as that occurs, then we can move forward with the plans for that building so that we can have it fitted out prior to our lease ending in August of 22. So that's critical. Then the other thing I wanted to mention was our camera equipment all throughout the district is aging. Now we have a new chief of security coming in. So that's probably a project that we'll be looking at down the road. I just have it in there. I don't know if it'll be next summer or the year after, but it's something we would work with the new chief of security on. It's not just the camera, it's the system and the software that it's on. It's very antiquated and you can't even access it from your phone or anything. So we're going to be looking at that a little bit down the road. On other education expenses, these are standard line items that we have for cycling replacement of large instruments, and we have a little reserve for athletic funds. But I wanted to mention we do have the band uniforms. I know they were mentioned earlier. We do have the band uniforms. I worked with Mr. Mangle. He would likely order them in the next school year. It takes a really long time for uniforms to be made. So they would receive them in the following fall for, I guess it would be for the 22, 23, but we'll have some deposit requirements in 21, 22. So over the 5 years, the capital projects are totaling approximately $18 million. We fund that, as you know, with the capital transfer from the general fund worth about 2.3 to 2.6, depending on the value of a mill of real estate taxes. It's an assessed value calculation. Since we're not transferring, the borrowing will definitely help keep us on track for our capital plan without any additional impact to the taxpayers, which is the best news. That's my presentation. Do we have any questions?
Any questions? Besides the fact that Dr. Melnick would like to get an old trombone, perhaps?
Oh, that's right.
We'll talk about that at a later time, but anyway, just to...
Just don't tell my wife. She doesn't like my trumpet right now.
Oh, that's funny. Oh.
I have a question. Sorry, I'm not on the committee, but.
Sure.
So the 10 million of borrowing, that money, so there must be money in this capital budget now. How much is in there now?
About 6 million.
Okay, so it'll be up to about 16 million then, and that will just, but then we'll go back to putting the money in again.
Yes. I mean, the goal is that we only do this for 1 year and that we continue to fund it. And if there are any, it's important to know there's also a capital budget policy that if there are any budget savings, they automatically also flow over to the capital fund.
Right, okay.
So
Where do we want that fund to stay? Because obviously if we have 10 million, we're only going to spend, this, each year will be some, how do we want that to be balanced, basically?
it's very low in my opinion right now. So
Yeah.
that's why we're trying to bolster it a little bit. In the past, when we have done projects, we've financed one, and then the next time we've paid for it in cash. So we're not going back to the taxpayers for increase in debt every time we need to build something that's capital in nature. So honestly, I would really prefer that this carry a balance carry balance closer to $10 million. And I think that's conservative. I think that's very conservative. I just don't see us doing that for a while yet because we're in the middle of COVID and we're trying to build those reserves again, and it takes time to build the reserves. We just came off of large building projects.
Right, okay,
If that makes sense.
yep, thanks.
I do have one question.
Sure.
And Mr. Friel actually said he can barely hear you, so
Oh,
whatever that's
sorry, it
worth.
must be the mask.
We have to waive the policy. When do we
Correct.
do that? At the April meeting?
We would waive the
Or after the
policy
budget's
at the
passed?
same time that you are approving the budget.
Okay, that's,
So we'll handle it the same way that we did before, and it would just be a 1-year
okay,
waiver of the transfer, if people are
Okay.
comfortable.
got it. Any other questions before we get to item 7, which is the approval to recommend a professional services agreement, Jackie?
Yes. We are requesting that we move our mercantile tax collection services. Right now, they're with Berkheimer. So we're asking the Finance Committee to consider moving to Keystone. Keystone collects our real estate. They also do, and this is the most important, they also collect the county-wide earned income tax. And that's really the role or the register that you really need to effectively, collect mercantile, which is a business-type tax. So I think we'll have better records for Keystone has better records. They have our records,
Okay.
they have the whole county's records for collection of those taxes. So that's why we're recommending the change. There's plenty of time. I mean, they don't really start, it's a January to December
Oh, okay.
timeframe. So there's plenty of time, but there's some notification provisions in the contract. And I just want to make sure that we're at least talking about it. If you're comfortable moving it forward, we can move it forward, and I can start working with the solicitor and Keystone on those resolutions and provide notification to Berkheimer to give them a heads up.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions on this agreement?
Yeah, I had questioned you, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago about tax collection options for those who wish to drive their bill somewhere, pay their bill in person. And they had to go all the way down to Westchester with Berkheimer. Would that continue with Keystone?
What we're doing with Keystone right now is we're handling any exceptions on a case-by-case basis. So if there's a senior citizen that doesn't want to drive to Westchester, where Keystone's collection area is, we're handling it in the business office on a case-by-case. So hopefully, if you're hearing of any concerns about that, please just let me know. We'll take care of it.
I have not recently, for the record, but I was just curious as to whether Keystone would have more options, really, like paying at the post office or something like that.
They really don't. I mean, they have a tax collections site center, like their office. Everything's really online. If you want to pay in person, then you go to their office to pay in person.
And they're also in Westchester?
They're in Westchester. I think we're talking about Keystone, real estate tax collection.
Oh,
I
okay,
think
maybe
that's
it
what
was,
you might-
maybe it was Keystone that I
Yeah.
was asking about then.
Mhm.
The memory's foggy. Thanks.
That's okay. Sure.
Is the committee comfortable moving that forward? Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Melnizak and Mrs. Munson.
And Jennifer Munson. Okay, thank you. I think that's all we have for the committee this evening.
I think that is. I think it's now time to open it up to the public. If there are questions out there, Mr. San Francesco, do you have any hands raised?
Mrs. Booth, I did want to just add that late this afternoon, we received this information regarding the ESSERS funds, what Mrs. Crumrine is calling Part 3. So we'll have information for the board. They gave us a very brief overview that we'll be able to include in board line for this week regarding how the monies how the money can be spent, the amount of money that we must reserve to address learning loss. And then it also indicates that we will need to draft a safe return to in-school instruction plan. So more to come. Superintendents and business managers received information late this afternoon, so more will be coming out from the state and from the county.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Booth, there's no hands raised.
All right, well, it must have been the finance cup, right? Well, I'd like to thank everybody for their hard work. I know this puts the business office and all of the administrators through a lot of hoops that they have to jump through, and we keep looking for operational efficiencies, and as I said, we need to be cautious and cognizant of our community's fiscal health at the moment, and we are doing that to our best ability, and I want to thank everybody for being so diligent, and I want to thank all of my committee. You've done a good job. I appreciate the questions. And if there's nothing else, we will adjourn the meeting. Anything else? Thank you, everyone. Meeting adjourned.